Great. How are you doing, Keith? Thanks for having me.
Excellent. In the last two episodes, or the last two issues of Savage Planets, we interviewed original cast members from the original series. And so it's my pleasure to invite Vic Mignogna here to speak with us about the next stage, which was Star Trek Continues. He is the executive producer. He was a writer on the show, an editor, but he also was an important actor. He played the role of Captain Kirk, and we'll be asking him some questions about his role very shortly. In addition, he's also a musician, an artist, and a screen and stage performer of excellence. So it's our real pleasure to have him today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Wow, that was really nice. We should probably stop now. Where's wow, really good.
So I'd like to start with your motivation. How did you get the idea to create the pilot for Star Trek Continues? And then once you received good feedback, what made you continue to develop the series?
I've always loved the original series of Star Trek. I'm 61 years old, and I had just discovered it right after it was canceled. And I fell in love with that show in a way that I'd never. It moved me and grabbed my imagination and my creativity in a way that nothing ever had before. When I was a little boy, I ate, slept, and breathed that show. I would make my own uniforms. I would make my own little cardboard sets out behind our apartment building. I would round the kids in the neighborhood up to make little Star Trek movies where I would make them wear the uniforms that I made. I would hang little toy Enterprises in front of black cardboard and run past it with the camera to make it look like the ship was flying past you. I credit Star Trek literally with having jump-started my creativity. I went on to do learn and study and train and take classes in and major in and gain experience in a lot of the things that I do now professionally. I went into for the first time because of Star Trek. Now, fast forward several decades, I had been alerted that there were some fan productions out there, and that they had built maybe some partial sets and were playing Star Trek. And I was probably maybe mid-40s at the time, but it really piqued my curiosity. And so I went and played a role in one, and two things happened. It rekindled my love of the original series, and it also got me thinking this could be done so much better than these groups are doing it. They mean this is not an insult. They mean they just don't know what they don't know. They're not filmmakers. They're not actors. They're not lighting experts. They're not cameramen. They're not editors. They're not writers per se. There are a lot of elements of production that elude them. Sound, music, lighting, editing, wardrobe, makeup, acting, so many things that go into making something. So I decided I was going to make one episode, and I was going to make it as close to what I remember the original series being and how much I loved it. And so I got some friends together, and we rented a building in South Georgia where we proceeded to draw up the floor plans and recreate the entire soundstage from the original series. It had not been done before. There had been fan productions that had built some of the sets, but not all of them, by no means, anywhere near all of them. So we built them, and the plan was to just make one good episode as best as we could. I funded it to a large extent, along with a couple of other people, Stephen Dengler, namely. And we released it not knowing how it was going to go, how people would respond to it. Star Trek fans can be very discriminating, very opinionated. And here I am playing my childhood hero. That was so daunting, so daunting. Goodness gracious. I was scared to death because I love Bill Shatner. I wanted to pay tribute to the show. I certainly did not want to satirize it or mock it in some way. You know how over the years he and George Takei and several of their performances and personalities have been very stereotyped. And I didn't want to do that. So we released our first episode not knowing how it was going to go, but it was well received. And at this point now, we've created a proof of concept, if you will. We have demonstrated what we are capable of doing. Here it is in living color, 56 minutes long of a Star Trek episode, a teaser in 4 acts, just like the original. And if you like it, will you help us make more? We launched a crowdfunding campaign. The fans responded. We made 4, 5, 2, 3, and 4. Then we launched another crowdfunding campaign and made 5, 6, and 7. And during that time, we did what had never been done. We built the engineering section. And then we raised the money to make 8, 9, 10, and 11 and did again what had never been done. We built an interior planet set. We made 11 full-length episodes that did what we intended to do, and that was pick up where the original series was canceled and leave everybody where Star Trek the Motion Picture picks up 10 years later, and craft story-driven reasons for why Captain Kirk would take promotion. Why would Spock go back to Vulcan to pursue the culinary discipline? Why did McCoy quit the service altogether? Rather than just these guys showing up 10 years later, we thought, wouldn't it be cool to craft a story that explains why they are where they are and perfectly fill that gap between the original series and the motion picture. And I'm very humbled and proud to say that we now have well over 17.5 million viewers. And I'm very proud of every single person that worked on Star Trek Continues, no matter what they did, no matter in front of the camera, behind the camera, no matter how big or small, everyone's contribution was incredibly valuable. We created a great team of people, and I'm very proud of our series.
Clearly, you're a committed Trekkie. How did you go about researching all the requisite features that went into the production? This was far beyond what an ardent fan would. You actually had to become an expert. You had to look at every aspect of the show in the 60s and then try to mimic it, but also modernize it. So how did you go about that process? Did you distribute the process to different specialists, your sets, your costumes, your lighting, or did you do it yourself?
Well, most definitely, it's a group effort, obviously. The trick is in getting the right group, right? There's no doubt that it was a group effort, but the trick is in bringing the right people into that group. And I'm very proud of the people we brought in. Now, I'm a good cameraman. I've shot a lot of professional productions. I know composition and camera work. I know my way around a camera very well. F-stop, iris, focus, all of it. But Matt Busey is even better, so he was our DP. And I've written plenty of things, but I don't consider myself really a writer. So I really took on the role that Gene Roddenberry did, where he would have sci-fi writers of the day submit a script, and then he would take it and mold it and tweak it into his vision of these characters and this show. In fact, for that, he was hated by a lot of the writers. A lot of the writers hated him because he would rewrite their work. To me, that sounds like ego, but whatever you want to call it, he lost a lot of friends in the writing in the writing industry there because of that. But he made Star Trek what he wanted to be, and Star Trek Continues was my baby. I created it. I found the build. I rented the building. I coordinated having the sets built. I cast it. I flew everybody down. I paid to put them in hotels. I came up with the first idea for the first script, Pilgrim of Eternity. And then I had a couple of writers turn it into a screenplay. And then I took their screenplay and did what Gene Roddenberry did, tweaked it. And then I can make costumes, but I can't touch Ginger Holly. And I know makeup. I've been in theater for 40 years. I could make up people. I could turn somebody into a Vulcan. I can do all it, but not like Lisa and Tim and the amazing crew that we had. I know lighting, but I know it well enough to know bring in people that are really good at it. Sound, I know sound. So I had a rudimentary understanding. And I think, quite honestly, Keith, that's one of the things that made Star Trek Continues good, is that the person who was, quote unquote, at the helm knew enough about all these different areas to know what's missing, what's right, what's wrong, what's hitting the mark, what's not hitting the mark. And like I said, I'm going to bring it full circle and say that I had many people that I brought on board with me to help in each department make it what it needed to be. Carpentry, I used to build houses. I know carpentry. I helped lay out the floor plans, and I went down a dozen times and hammered nails and cut drywall and cut luan, painted and sanded, but that's not my specialty. I was a part of it, but knowing who to put in charge of it is really the trick. And we had a lot of great people in every department.
And it created a gravity well that drew in original cast members. It drew in Star Trek Generation actors because they wanted to relive that experience. And you made it possible, which is the beauty of this event.
I appreciate you saying that. And there's something magical about Star Trek, the original. And you know what it is? Whoever was a little kid, it doesn't matter who it is. They're Tom Hanks today. They're the Incredible Hulk. They're Tom Hanks. They're Seth MacFarlane. They're big stars now. But when they were nobodies, when they were 11 years old and 12 years old, they have these very nostalgic, warm memories of this show that they loved. And that's why, in many cases, we were able to get some of these wonderful actors, not just from Star Trek, but from other franchises who knew what we were doing. They knew it was completely a labor of love, that it was completely a passion project. We were not allowed to make money on Star Trek, nor did we want to. That was not why we made it. We made it to say thank you and to pay tribute to this show that has inspired millions around the world. I like to tell people Star Trek Continues is my love letter to the original series.
Were there any episodes that you came up with that you realized you couldn't possibly do because of budgetary restraints or because of the vision you had that you think wouldn't play out?
The original series suffered. The original series itself suffered from budget constraints. A lot of people don't know this, but Star Trek was the most expensive show on television at the time. In fact, a lot of people think, just pop culture in general, thinks that Star Trek was canceled because it wasn't popular. No, it was canceled because the network didn't want to make it because it was too expensive. It was canceled because they didn't want to spend the money to make it. The two most expensive shows on the air at the time were Star Trek and Mission Impossible. And if you think about Star Trek, it takes place in the 23rd century, which means you can't use anything in a contemporary sense. They don't wear these clothes. They don't fly these ships. They don't eat this food. They don't fire these weapons. Like everything, the ship, its interiors, the planets, the makeup, the wardrobe, everything has to be created or figured out in some way. And one of the big ways that the original series saved money was by using things that already existed. A lot of the things on the original soundstage were things that were just laying around or that were very common at the time. And all Star Trek did was they took them and they painted them a different color. Paint them a different color, glue a light, a little light or a little switch on it, done. And now it doesn't look like what it originally was, and it can be part of the 23rd century.
I heard go ahead. I heard a fabulous.
I was just going to say, we did the same thing.
Yeah.
There were, in answer to your question, there were stories that we had that would be insurmountable. I'll give you a perfect example. Our 5th episode, the Civil War episode. How the hell do you pull that off? We didn't have the kind of money they're in a battle of Antietam. You're talking about thousands of people that Kirk gets hit by a stray cannonball. Like, how do you pull this off, right? Kirk gets his leg cut off and they're in the Civil War period. So we had to basically problem solve. How do you do this given the constraints you have? Which is exactly what the original series would have done. What do? You find a Civil War reenactment group that are fans of Civil War, just like you're fans of Star Trek. Then you find reenactments with thousands of people that you could never afford, right? Cannons, horses, all of it. And then you take your camera and you shoot what's called B-roll. You shoot that battle, and then you intercut it with your actors, your own actors. And if it's done well, it comes off beautifully, and it goes way beyond what you ever could have afforded monetarily.
Excellent. Excellent. One of the wonderful additions to Star Trek Continues is a ship counselor, Dr. Elise McKenna, played beautifully by Michelle Specht.
Yes.
Her role essentially enabled the Beta Zeds posting in Star Trek Next Generation. And that transition was beautiful because she was a test case.
They weren't really sure if she was going to work out. You remember that first episode, she shows up already. Oh, Captain, I'm here. And they're like, not now. We've got stuff to deal with. Yes, welcome aboard. But I'm not really so sure you're that needed. We got Dr. McCoy here, blah, blah, blah. So when I was conceptualizing the show, Michelle and I had a conversation about, do you want to play Yeoman Rand? Do you want to play Nurse Chapel? Now, Michelle is a really good actress. And so as we were discussing what she would do, I started thinking, I want to start bridging the gap between the original series and the Next Generation. So that begs the question, what did they have in the Next Generation that they did not have in TOS? For one thing, a holodeck. For another thing, a ship's counselor. We decided to add an experimental holodeck, which is how we started our series. And it came back to use again in episode 4. And Michelle and I decided it would be really cool to create an original character that was an experimental ship's counselor. And that character does not exist in the motion picture. Why not? What happened to her? Where'd she go? So we decided partway through to make her a pivotal reason, plot point, if you will, for why a lot of things go the way they go. And she did a great job. If you think about it, characters like Uhura, Sulu, Chekhov, like they're iconic. To hold your own as an original character with characters like that is no easy task. And she did a great job.
First, I want to compliment you on your performance as Captain Kirk. Even your body habitus was similar enough to William Shatner's that you made Kirk appear seamless.
Thank
Now,
you.
did you discuss with Shatner this role, or did you watch him acting? How did you prepare to be Captain Kirk?
My friend, I've been preparing my whole life. Now, what I mean by that is this. A lot of people have asked me, how long did you study William Shatner to get his mannerisms and everything down? And I tell them the same thing I'm going to tell you, Keith. I didn't study anything. I just absorbed the original series when I was 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Through those years, that show meant everything to me. I started auditioning for school plays because I wanted to do what Bill Shatner and Leonard Nimoy were doing. I wanted to create emotions and move people in a way that the way they moved me and many others. So I never had any discussions with Bill. Bill and I have become good friends, and I love him dearly. And I've even told him, you were like a father figure to me. In fact, you were a father figure. You were a role model. My parents divorced when I was 9. Dad took off, and there was this strong, brave leader of men, and he became very much a role model to me. So I didn't jump through any particular hoops to learn any mannerisms or study anything. It all came very naturally because he was who I loved and just absorbed when I was a little boy.
One of the overarching themes that I got in watching it, I just went through the whole series again in 1 week because I really wanted to refresh my memory and really prepare for this. But one of the overarching themes in Star Trek Continues is loss.
Yeah.
And in episode 4, Kirk reflects on the loss of 4 of his lovers, and we see a loss of new friends, and ultimately everyone loses the Enterprise at the completion of the 5-year mission. In a previous interview, you mentioned there was a unique camaraderie of the cast and crew that socialized after the shooting days. And do you believe this camaraderie resulted from this kind of joyful grief, an after shooting wake, as it were? Because even in that last scene where you're the admiral, you're standing on stage, you could just tell that your heart is breaking. So my question is, was that something you planned, or was it spontaneous?
One of the things about the original series, it was indicative of its time. In the 60s, the heroes never made a mistake. The heroes always saved the day. The heroes always got the girl. The heroes always had the solution. And when I started this series, I thought, okay, first of all, our show is going to be story driven. Star Trek is not known for its sets. Star Trek is not heralded 60 years later because of its costumes or because of its special effects. It's beloved 60 years later because of the stories it told and the characters it created and the relationships that people were drawn to. And that's what I wanted in our stories. It set a very high bar. When you set the bar that high, you're like, wow, are we even going to be able to come up with any stories? And if so, how many that draw on that? And so I really appreciate that you felt like you're saying that you felt like a lot of it was about loss. I think loss is something, I'm going to start over. I don't think anything. I know it. Loss is something we all experience. If you didn't yesterday, you will tomorrow.
Excellent. Thank you.
If you live long enough, you'll experience loss. Could be a small loss. Oh, dang, I lost my wallet. Could be a huge loss. I lost my mom. I lost my love. Whatever. Loss is inevitable. It's inescapable. And I felt like the more that we could make our characters and our stories relatable, the more they would impact people. I purposed to make James Kirk a fallible, struggling human being, especially in episode 4. The White Iris was all about the shame and the regret and the remorse that he must feel. Women that he loved and lost for whatever reason, and no closure. You can't live with that for very long before it starts bubbling to the surface. I think you're right. I think it did permeate a lot of our series. And I'm glad it did, because it's real life. And if we create a story that reaches someone who is in a difficult moment of loss and it helps them, wow, you can't put a price tag on that.
One of the best episodes, or my favorite episode, was the 9th episode.
Ah, yes.
Because there's this unique form of radiation that causes a pandemic threatening the people, but there's also the asteroid's inhabitants seeing in black and white. And it effectively cloaks the inhabitants' skin tone from one another. And it's such a clever way to explore the race issue. It's a multi-leveled story, and John Delancey was great in it.
Yeah.
But we also see the banter at the very beginning with Bones, Spock, and Kirk, and that's something that everyone was craving at that point, as they wanted to see the three of them on the bridge, chit-chatting and doing what they do. But
Yes.
Then you threw McKenna in, and she enhanced that camaraderie and modernized it. What was your favorite episode? Can you even pick a favorite episode?
You know what? That is a really hard question, because there is not one element of one episode that I didn't have something to do with. Whether it was a line of dialogue or a prop or the fabric that a costume was made of or lighting. I edited all the episodes. I cast 99% of the roles. So it would be impossible. It would be very hard for me to pick a favorite. Now, having said that, I believe the 9th episode is one of our best standalone episodes. It's one of the most classic Star Trek episodes. Thematically, I think I directed it. It was executed as well as we could execute it. I'll tell you a fun story, Keith, the way that episode even came about. I was talking on the phone one day with James Kerwin, who was one of our producers. I'll never forget it. I was in O'Hare Airport in Chicago, and I was in the United Club waiting for my flight. And he and I were talking about the post-production on such and such an episode, or the sound design on such and such an episode, or building this set for this episode. And I said to him, we were talking about the first time we saw Star Trek. And I said to him, the first time I saw it was on a 19-inch black and white television. That's all my mom and I had. We didn't even have a table to put the television on. The television sat on the floor. And I laid on the floor and watched Star Trek every afternoon after school. And James said a lot of people's first experience with Star Trek was black and white. And I said, wouldn't it be cool if we came up with a story-driven reason for why we could present an episode in black and white. It would feel so nostalgic in black and white, but it can't just be black and white for the sake of being black and white. There'd have to be a reason, a story-driven reason. And we came up with this planet that had this radiation shield that blocked out certain color spectrum. And then we handed it off to Kipley Brown, and she wrote the most amazing screenplay. And 9 became one of my favorites, one of my favorite standalones. Now, episode 4 was also very important to me because of what it said about Captain Kirk. I loved 5 because the Civil War episode, because when I was a boy, a lot of my favorite Star Trek episodes were the ones where they went somewhere in some period in history. I loved it, like whether it was the Depression or gangsters or Nazi Germany or the Roman Empire or whatever. I loved those episodes. So I remember thinking, what's a time period they never went to? Oh my gosh, the Civil War. And then I started thinking about how Kirk was a big fan of Lincoln, how they established that Lincoln was one of his heroes. Then I started thinking, what if you stranded a Southern gentleman who would, had they been in the Civil War, would have, he's from Georgia, he would have fought for the rebels. And Kirk would have been in the Union. What if you strand them in the Civil War, but they're friends? They're supposed to be enemies, but they're friends. And how do they get out of it? And then I said to Todd Haberkorn, who played Spock, I said to Todd, but I don't want to get there any of the conventional ways. Time travel, it's been done.
Yeah.
Earth parallel, it's been done. Todd was the one that came up with the idea of what if there were these nanites, some sort of alien entity that took over the computer, and it was downloading Earth history, and they were trying to use techniques to flush it out of the computer. And as they were trying to do that, one of the boards blows up, and those nanites get all over Kirk and McCoy. And as far as anyone else knows, they're unconscious in comas in sick bay, but the nanites were downloading historical information from the Civil War when the explosion took place. So the entire thing is taking place in Kirk and McCoy's mind. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what an original, brilliant idea. So kudos to Todd Haberkorn for that one.
That's great. That's great. I heard a quote from a NASA scientist who said something really amazing. He says, we had to have gone and done a moon landing because in 1969, the film technology to simulate accurately a moon landing was not possible. It would cost more to actually simulate it than it was to actually go to the moon.
I wonder, that's a very interesting perspective, actually. I've never really heard that take on it, but that makes sense. Makes sense.
Moving further afield, your vocal range is impressive as a voice actor, and it probably was one of your big money makers during your career. You've performed an amazing variety of science fiction and fantasy films, Japanese animation or Japanimation.
A lot of anime, yes. A lot of anime, yes.
What was the character who was most difficult for you, and which character would you like to be in the future or like to do more of?
I've done over 400, and my favorite of all was a show called Full Metal Alchemist. I just loved the story. I loved the characters. I loved everything about that show. And it's regularly ranked as one of the top 10 anime of all time. Now, not because of me, I'm just saying story, the show itself is just wonderful. The only ones that were really difficult were ones that were vocally difficult, like hard, low, guttural, angry, chesty voices. They take their toll on your voice. I do a lot of singing and songwriting and piano playing and producing, and I can't sing as high as I used to because, you know, you scream and yell for 400 anime shows and video games. Your voice, yeah, takes a toll. But I was very blessed and very grateful to be able to do the things that I've done. I'm looking to do more on-camera stuff. And right now I'm working on audiobooks as well. I'm just grateful. I have a studio in my home. I'm sitting in it right now, and it gives me a chance to write music, write and produce audiobooks, whatever I need. Sound design, a film, whatever.
In closing, is Star Trek Continues over and done, or is there a possible spin-off you might see, some of the characters you take off? And what other projects can we look forward to from you? Do you have a dream project that our readers can support?
I will tell you this. I'm going to quote Mr. Spock. I would like to think that there are always possibilities, right? Our series is over. We did what we set out to do. We wanted to finish the original series, and we did that. No one else has done that. And I hate to sound cocky, but I don't think it's going to be done again, certainly not any better than we did it. And I say that to the credit of everyone in our cast and crew that were involved.
I agree.
Now, I have often thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to do a motion picture, to do a feature film with our cast? And I thought, what's a time period that they have not explored? And the first thing that came to my mind was the time period between the motion picture and the Wrath of Khan. And to be shallow about it, I love the maroon uniforms, and I would love to don one of those. I've already come up with a story idea that I think would be a really cool idea. It's not something we're able to accomplish now, but perhaps if the stars align. I will tell you this, everybody that worked on Star Trek Continues did so for free. For the most part, everybody was there because they believed in what we were doing and they wanted to be a part of something special. There were a couple of exceptions, but the vast majority. I would never ask them again to come together for free. They gave so much of themselves that I would never again say, hey, let's make a feature film, and will you give me 2 weeks of your life and no pay and whatever? Wouldn't even occur to me. I wouldn't do it. If anything does happen, it would be a feature film. It would probably be in that era, which is problematic because you can't use any of our sets. It's a different enterprise. There would be a lot of hurdles to overcome, but if we were ever to do anything again, that's what it would be. Now, in answer to your last question, and I've got to go, I'm working currently on a book, the second book in a series of books, novels. The first one's called The Crimson Spark by William Hastings. The second one I'm just finishing up is called The Opal Embers, and he's already finished the third book. And I'm telling you, if I had the money, they're fantasy novels with such a great story, such amazing characters, extravagant creatures. It's all a created world. It's like Harry Potter meets Lord of the Rings. And the two main characters are children. So it could be there could be something for everyone here. And it's so fantastic that I think it would be a huge success. I would love to see that somehow, get that in front of the right people, maybe get an elevator pitch going to somebody and see if we could find someone who might be interested in that. I'd love to be a part of something like that.
Vic, I really want to thank you again for your time, and really all your substantial contributions to the science fiction genre. Your performances are professional, they're spectacular, and they really elevated the bar. And I have no doubt that Star Trek Continues will be your legacy, if nothing else.
I believe that. I
Because
believe that. I've done a lot of things. But I'm very proud of what we all accomplished with Star Trek Continues. I'm not going to start naming names. I've named a lot of them already in the course of the conversation. I'm not going to start naming names because I'll forget people, and I don't want to do that. Because of everybody's amazing work and passion, it's something that I'm most proud of.
thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Keith. We'll look forward to speaking with you again. Thank you.
Bye.